They laughed when she entered the arena. They laughed when she picked up the wooden sword. They laughed when she stood before the greatest warriors of the pack. But when the first alpha hit the ground, bleeding and defeated, the laughter died. When the second fell, silence swept through the crowd like winter wind. And when she raised her blade to the third, they finally understood. The weak little Omega they had starved and beaten and mocked was not weak at all. She was a storm they should have never awakened. Her name was Ashrenah, and this is the story of how she broke every chain they ever put on her. In the ancient days, when wolves still remembered the old ways, the packs were ruled by strength. The strongest wolves were called alphas. They led hunts, they made laws, they took the best meat and the warmest dens. Below them were the betas, the middle wolves who followed orders and kept the peace. And below everyone else at the very bottom were the Omegas. Omegas ate last. They slept in the cold. They did the work no other wolf wanted to do. And if an Omega dared to complain, dared to look an alpha in the eye, dared to show even a hint of pride, they were beaten down until they remembered their place. Ashrenah was born Omega. She came into the world small and sickly, with fur the color of pale ash and eyes like winter ice. Her mother died bringing her into the world, and her father was unknown. The pack elders looked at the tiny pup and marked her with the Omega sign, a slash of mud across her forehead that would remind everyone of what she was. From her first breath, Ashrenah knew hunger. The other pups fed from the pack mothers, but they always pushed her away. She learned to wait until everyone else had eaten, learned to survive on scraps and bones. She learned that silence was safer than words, that looking down was wiser than meeting someone's gaze. The pack lived in the territory of Vormon, a vast stretch of ancient forest and rolling hills where pine trees grew so tall they seemed to touch the sky. In the center of this territory stood the Great Stone Circle, a ring of massive boulders that the ancestors had placed there in times so old that no one remembered why. This was where the pack gathered for ceremonies, for trials, and for the choosing of new alphas. The current pack leader was Thorax, a massive black wolf with scars covering his face and shoulders. Thorax had led the pack for 15 winters, and his rule was one of iron and blood. He believed that strength was everything, that weakness was a disease that had to be cut out before it spread. Under his leadership, the pack had grown powerful and feared, but also cruel. Thorax had 3 sons, all of them alphas. The eldest was Carven, who had his father's size and his mother's cunning. The middle son was Dravor, who was faster than any wolf in the pack and loved to hunt. The youngest was Fenrix, who was quieter than his brothers but no less dangerous. All 3 looked at Omega as the way a hunter looks at prey. Ashrenah grew up watching these wolves from the shadows. She watched how they moved, how they fought, how they commanded respect with just a look. She watched and she learned, even though she knew that knowledge would never help her. An Omega could never be an alpha. It was against the natural order, against the law of the pack, against everything the wolves believed. But Ashrenah had a secret. Late at night, when the rest of the pack slept, she would sneak away to a hidden clearing deep in the forest. There, she would practice fighting. She had found an old branch that was shaped almost like a sword, and she would swing it again and again, imagining enemies, imagining victories. She taught herself to move quickly, to dodge, to strike with precision. She had no teacher, no guide, only her own determination and the voice inside her that whispered she was meant for more than this. Seasons passed. Ashrenah grew from a pup into a young wolf. She was still small compared to the alphas, still marked as Omega, still beaten down whenever she showed the slightest bit of spirit. But inside, something was changing. The hunger that gnawed at her belly had become a different kind of hunger, a hunger for justice, for respect, for revenge. The pack had a tradition. Every year at the height of summer, they held the Trial of Blades. This was a tournament where wolves could prove their strength and skill with weapons. The ancient wolves had learned to shape wood and stone into blades and spears, and fighting with these tools had become a mark of true warriors. The Trial of Blades determined who would lead the hunts, who would guard the territory, who would stand at Thorax's side as his most trusted warriors. Only alphas and betas were allowed to enter the Trial of Blades. Omegas were forbidden from even touching weapons, much less using them. It was a law as old as the pack itself. But Ashrenah had been training with her wooden sword for 5 winters now. She had become so skilled that she could strike a leaf in mid-air, could move through the trees like smoke, could fight invisible enemies until the sun rose. She had become something the pack had never seen before, an Omega who could fight like an alpha. And she had decided that this year she would enter the Trial of Blades. The decision did not come easily. Ashrenah knew what would happen if she tried. She would be mocked. She would be beaten. Thorax might even kill her for breaking the sacred law. But she also knew that if she spent one more day bowing her head, one more day eating scraps, one more day being treated as less than nothing, something inside her would die. And that death would be worse than any death Thorax could give her. So on the morning of the Trial of Blades, as the entire pack gathered at the great stone circle, as the alphas strutted and boasted and prepared their weapons, Ashrenah walked into the center of the ring. The effect was immediate. Conversations stopped. Wolves turned to stare. Someone laughed, then another, and soon the entire pack was roaring with laughter. An Omega at the Trial of Blades, it was the funniest thing they had ever seen. Thorax stood on his high rock, looking down at the scene with cold yellow eyes. "What is this?" he growled, his voice cutting through the laughter like a blade through flesh. Ashrenah kept her head up, kept her eyes forward. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "I wish to enter the Trial of Blades." The laughter grew louder. Carven, Thorax's eldest son, stepped forward with a cruel grin on his face. "You, an Omega wants to fight? Does the little one even know which end of a sword to hold?" "I know," Ashrenah said quietly. "You know nothing," Carven snarled. "You are Omega. You are less than nothing. Go back to the scraps and the shadows where you belong before I tear your throat out for your disrespect." Ashrenah did not move. She looked up at Thorax, waiting for his judgment. The pack leader studied her for a long moment, his scarred face unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Let her fight," Thorax said. The pack fell silent, shocked. Even Carven looked confused. "Father." "I said let her fight," Thorax repeated. "If an Omega thinks she can stand with warriors, let her try. It will be entertaining to watch her fail. And when she does fail, when she is bleeding in the dirt, it will remind every Omega in this pack why they should never reach above their station. Let her fight." Carven's grin returned, wider and crueler than before. "As you wish, father. I volunteer to be her first opponent. I will make this quick." Thorax nodded. The Trial of Blades begins now. Carven versus the Omega, to first blood or submission, begin. Someone threw a wooden practice sword at Ashrenah's feet. It was smaller than the weapons the alphas used, meant for pups who were just learning. But Ashrenah picked it up and felt its weight, felt its balance. It was heavier than her branch, more solid, but the principle was the same. Carven drew his own sword, a beautiful weapon carved from dark oak and polished until it gleamed. He was twice Ashrenah's size, with muscles that rippled under his black fur and scars that proved he had survived countless battles. He looked at her the way a cat looks at a mouse. "Any last words, Omega?" he asked. Ashrenah raised her sword and took a fighting stance. "Stop talking and fight." Carven's eyes went wide with rage. No one spoke to him that way. No one. With a roar that shook the stones, he charged. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they knew what you were capable of? Remember that feeling as we continue Ashrenah's story. Carven was fast for his size. He closed the distance between them in 3 huge strides, his sword coming down in an overhead strike that would have split Ashrenah's skull if it had connected. But it did not connect. Ashrenah had spent 5 winters training, 5 winters learning to read movement, to anticipate attacks, to move like water around obstacles. She had studied the way alphas fought, the way they telegraphed their strikes with their shoulders and their eyes. She had made herself ready for this moment. She sidestepped Carven's attack so smoothly that his blade hit only empty air. The momentum of his swing carried him forward, off balance for just a heartbeat. That heartbeat was all Ashrenah needed. She struck, Not a powerful blow, she did not have the strength for that, but a precise one. Her wooden sword snapped out like a viper and caught Carven across the back of his front leg, right where the muscle was thinnest. It was a perfect strike to a pressure point, and Carven's leg buckled beneath him. He crashed to the ground, snarling in surprise and pain. The pack gasped. Carven had never been knocked down in a fight. Never. But Carven was not defeated. He rolled to his feet with a roar of pure fury, his eyes blazing with hatred. "You will die for that, Omega," he screamed and charged again. This time he was not trying to end the fight quickly. He was trying to hurt her to make her suffer. His attacks came in a flurry, high and low, left and right, each one meant to cripple or maim. Any one of those strikes would have ended a normal opponent. But Ashrenah was not normal. She flowed around his attacks like smoke, never standing still, never giving him a solid target. She had learned this from watching leaves fall through the forest, the way they danced and spun on the wind. She had made herself into a leaf, and Carven was the wind that could not catch her. The pack watched in stunned silence. This was not how the fight was supposed to go. Carven was supposed to crush the Omega in seconds, supposed to send her crawling back to her place with her pride destroyed. But instead, he was chasing her around the ring, growing more frustrated with each missed strike. Ashrenah's mind was crystal clear. She was not thinking about the crowd, not thinking about what would happen after this fight. She was thinking only about movement, about timing, about the one perfect opening she needed. And then she saw it. Carven overextended on a strike, putting all his weight behind it. His guard was down. His neck was exposed. Ashrenah's sword was already moving before her mind had finished processing the opportunity. She spun inside his reach and struck him across the throat with the flat of her blade. It was not a killing blow. The sword was wood, and this was only a trial. But it was hard enough to knock the breath from Carven's lungs and send him staggering backward, gasping for air. And it was hard enough to draw blood. A thin line of red appeared across his throat where the edge of the wooden sword had caught him. First blood. The trial was over. The pack erupted. Some wolves were cheering, caught up in the impossible spectacle they had just witnessed. Others were shouting in outrage, unable to believe that an Omega had defeated an Alpha. Thorax stood on his rock, his expression unreadable. Carven touched his throat, looked at the blood on his paw, and his face went pale with shock. Then it went dark with rage. "No," he snarled. "This is not over." He raised his sword again, prepared to strike despite the rules of the trial. But Thorax's voice cut through the chaos like thunder. "Enough." Carven froze. Every wolf in the pack went silent. Thorax descended from his rock and walked to the center of the ring, his massive form casting a shadow over both fighters. He looked at his son with cold disapproval. "The trial is over," Thorax said. "First blood was drawn. The Omega has won." "But father," Carven began, his voice shaking with humiliation and rage. "Silence," Thorax commanded. "You have brought shame to yourself and to me by losing to an Omega. Do not add to that shame by breaking the sacred rules of the trial." Carven's jaw clenched so hard Ashrenah could hear his teeth grinding. But he lowered his sword and stepped back, his eyes promising murder. Thorax turned his attention to Ashrenah. She met his gaze, refusing to look away despite every instinct screaming at her to submit. She had broken too many rules today to start following them now. "You have won your first trial," Thorax said slowly. "That is unexpected, but one victory means nothing. The trial of blades is not complete until you have faced all challengers. There are 20 alphas in this pack. You have defeated one. Will you face the rest? Or will you admit that your victory was luck and accept your place as Omega?" Ashrenah's body was already tired. Her legs were shaking from the strain of dodging Carven's attacks. Her paws ached from gripping the sword so tightly. She knew that Thorax was offering her a way out, a chance to walk away before she was destroyed. But she also knew that if she walked away now, everything would be lost. The alphas would make her suffer for her audacity. Carven would hunt her down the moment Thorax looked away. And worst of all, she would go back to being nothing, to bowing her head and eating scraps and dying slowly in the shadows. "I will face them all," Ashrenah said. A ripple of shock went through the pack. Thorax's eyes gleamed with something that might have been respect or might have been anticipation of her suffering. "So be it," he said. "Who will fight the Omega next?" Dravor, Thorax's middle son, stepped forward immediately. He was smaller than Carven but faster, with lean muscles built for speed. "I will restore my brother's honor," he said, "and I will make this Omega bleed." The fight began before Ashrenah was ready. Dravor did not announce his attack or give her time to prepare. He simply moved, crossing the distance between them in a blur of motion that was almost too fast to see. His sword came at her from 3 directions at once, or so it seemed. This was Dravor's specialty. His attacks were so rapid that they seemed to multiply. Ashrenah barely managed to block the first strike, and the second hit her shoulder hard enough to make her gasp in pain. But she did not fall. She gritted her teeth against the pain and focused. Fast as Dravor was, he had a pattern. 3 strikes high, 2 strikes low, 1 thrust. She counted them in her head as she blocked and dodged, her sword moving faster than it ever had before. 3 high, 2 low, 1 thrust. The pattern repeated, and when she knew it by heart, she broke it. On his 3rd high strike, she did not block. She dropped to the ground, rolled beneath his blade, and came up inside his guard. Her sword struck him in the ribs with all the force she could muster. Dravor's eyes went wide. He tried to spin away, but his speed worked against him. His momentum carried him forward even as Ashrenah's blade caught him across the chest, drawing a line of blood through his fur. Second victory. The pack was no longer laughing. They were watching in stunned silence as Dravor stumbled back, looking at the blood on his chest as if he could not believe it was real. Carven's face was twisted with fury. Thorax's expression remained unreadable, but his tail was twitching, a sign that even he was unsettled. "Next," Ashrenah said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion pulling at her limbs. "Who is next?" Fenrix, the youngest of Thorax's sons, stepped forward. He did not speak, did not boast or threaten. He simply drew his sword and took a fighting stance. Of all Thorax's sons, Fenrix was the one Ashrenah feared most. He did not rely on size like Carven or speed like Dravor. He relied on intelligence and patience. They circled each other slowly. Fenrix was studying her, looking for weaknesses, for patterns in her movements. Ashrenah knew that her best tricks would not work on him. He had watched her defeat his brothers. He knew what she was capable of. So she would have to do something he did not expect. Fenrix struck first, a careful probing attack meant to test her defenses. Ashrenah blocked it easily. He struck again, a little harder, a little faster. She blocked that too. He was analyzing her blocks, looking for the opening that would end the fight. And so Ashrenah gave him one. She blocked his next attack but left her left side exposed just for a moment. It looked like exhaustion, like her guard was dropping. Fenrix's eyes lit up. He saw the opening and took it, his sword darting toward her exposed ribs. But it was a trap. The moment Fenrix committed to the attack, Ashrenah twisted her body and brought her sword around in a move she had practiced 1,000 times. Her blade caught his sword mid-strike and deflected it upward, past her head. And before he could recover, she was inside his guard, her sword pressed against his throat. They stood frozen for a heartbeat, both of them breathing hard. Then Ashrenah pressed just hard enough to draw a single drop of blood. Third victory. Fenrix stepped back slowly, his eyes meeting hers with a look of grudging respect. "Well fought," he said quietly. Thorax descended from his rock again. The pack parted before him like grass before wind. He looked at Ashrenah with those cold, yellow eyes, and for the first time, she saw uncertainty there. "3 victories," Thorax said. "You have defeated my sons, all 3 of them. That is something no one has ever done before, but there are still 17 alphas who have not faced you. Your body is failing, Omega. I can see it in the way you stand, in the way your sword trembles. Accept defeat now and I will let you live. Continue and you will die." Ashrenah knew he was right. Her body was screaming at her to stop. Every muscle ached. Her paws were bleeding from gripping the sword. She could barely stand. But she was also closer to freedom than she had ever been. 3 victories, 3 impossible victories. If she stopped now, it would mean nothing. But if she continued, if she somehow managed to defeat every alpha in the pack, then everything would change. The old laws would be broken. The old order would fall. And she, the starved and beaten Omega, would stand at the top. "I continue," she said. Thorax's eyes narrowed. Then he nodded slowly. "Then you will face them all at once." The pack gasped. Even the alphas looked shocked. Fighting them one by one was one thing. Fighting them all together was suicide. "The law says," Ashrenah began, but Thorax cut her off. "I am the law," he said. "And I say that if you wish to continue, you will face all 17 remaining alphas at the same time. This is my judgment. Accept it or forfeit." Ashrenah looked at the 17 alphas who were now surrounding her. They were fresh and eager, their eyes gleaming with the promise of violence. She was exhausted and bleeding, barely able to keep her sword raised. It was impossible. There was no way she could win. But she had already done 3 impossible things today. What was one more? "I accept," Ashrenah said. The 17 alphas formed a ring around Ashrenah. They were all skilled warriors, all trained since they were pups in the art of combat. They were strong, fast, and most importantly, they were rested while she was near collapse. The rules of the Trial of Blades said that a fight ended at first blood or submission. But with 17 opponents, Ashrenah knew that the rules would not matter. They would not stop at first blood. They would tear her apart. She took a deep breath and forced her exhausted mind to focus. She could not beat 17 alphas through strength. She could barely beat them one at a time. But maybe, just maybe, she did not have to beat them. Maybe she just had to survive. Thorax raised his paw. "Begin." The alphas charged as one, a wave of fur and fangs and wooden blades. Ashrenah did not try to fight them. She ran. She darted through the gap between 2 alphas before they could close it, rolled under a sword swing, and sprinted toward the edge of the stone circle. The alphas gave chase, howling with bloodlust. But Ashrenah was smaller than them, more agile, and she knew something they did not. She had explored every inch of this territory, knew every rock and tree and hiding place. She led them in a spiral around the stone circle, using the massive boulders as cover. When an alpha got too close, she would slash at their legs or face, just enough to make them stumble and fall behind. When they tried to surround her, she would slip through gaps they did not think she could fit through. It was not fighting, it was survival, and she was very, very good at survival. But even as she ran and dodged and struck, Ashrenah could feel her body failing. Her lungs burned. Her legs felt like they were made of stone. The sword was so heavy in her paws that she could barely lift it. She was bleeding from a dozen small cuts where the alphas had managed to graze her. She could not keep this up much longer. One of the alphas, a large gray wolf named Gorman, managed to get ahead of her. He planted himself in her path, his sword raised. Behind her, the other alphas were closing in. She was trapped. Gorman grinned. "Nowhere left to run, Omega." Ashrenah looked at him, then at the alphas behind her, then up at the sky. The sun was directly overhead, blazing down with summer heat. And in that moment, exhausted and desperate, she remembered something her mother had once said. She had been very young, barely able to remember her mother's face, but she remembered the words. "When you cannot fight the storm, become the storm." Ashrenah closed her eyes. She let go of the fear, let go of the pain, let go of everything except the primal need to survive. And something inside her changed. When she opened her eyes, they were no longer the eyes of prey. They were the eyes of a predator. She charged Gorman with a scream that froze the blood of every wolf who heard it. It was not a scream of fear. It was a scream of fury, of rage that had been building for her entire life. All the hunger, all the beatings, all the humiliation, all of it came pouring out in that moment. Gorman braced himself for her attack, confident in his strength. But Ashrenah did not strike him with her sword. She leaped onto one of the stone boulders, ran up its side with speed born of desperation, and launched herself over Gormon's head. Her sword lashed out as she flew past him, catching him across the back of the neck. She landed hard, rolled, and came up running. Behind her, Gormon collapsed, blood streaming from the wound on his neck. It was not a fatal blow, but it was enough to take him out of the fight. The other alphas hesitated. They had expected a victim. They had expected an easy kill. They had not expected this. Ashrenah used their hesitation. She ran to the largest of the stone boulders, a massive rock that stood taller than any wolf. She scrambled up its side using cracks and ledges that she had found during her lonely explorations. The alphas tried to follow, but the climb was difficult and they were too large, too heavy. Only a few managed to make it up. On top of the boulder, Ashrenah had the high ground. When the first alpha reached the top, she was waiting. Her sword struck him across the face and he fell, tumbling down the boulder's side. The second alpha was more careful, but Ashrenah feinted one way and struck another, and he too fell. From her vantage point, she could see the entire battlefield. The alphas below were arguing about how to reach her. Some wanted to wait her out, knowing she would have to come down eventually. Others wanted to climb up together, overwhelm her with numbers. But Thorax's voice cut through their bickering. "Enough of this, you are alphas. Are you going to let an Omega make fools of you? Bring her down, now." Shamed by their leader's words, the alphas renewed their attack with desperate fury. They piled on top of each other, forming a living ladder. They threw stones. They tried to shake the boulder itself. Ashrenah fought them off as best she could, but there were too many of them. Her sword arm was numb. Her vision was starting to blur. Blood ran into her eyes from a cut on her forehead. And then one of the alphas made it to the top, then another, then 3 more. She was surrounded again, this time with nowhere to run. "Submit," one of them growled. "This is over." Ashrenah looked at them. 5 against 1 on top of a boulder with no escape. Her body was beyond exhaustion. She could barely see straight. It was over. But then she looked past them, at the pack watching from below. She saw the Omegas huddled at the edge of the crowd, their eyes wide with hope and fear. She saw the younger wolves, the pups who were watching and learning what was possible. She saw Thorax standing on his rock, watching her with those cold yellow eyes. And she knew she could not give up. Not now, not when she was so close. "No," Ashrenah said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried in the silence. "I will not submit." The 5 alphas attacked together, but Ashrenah was no longer thinking, no longer planning. She was simply reacting, moving on pure instinct and muscle memory from 5 winters of secret training. Her body knew what to do even when her mind was too exhausted to guide it. She dropped her sword. The alphas blinked in confusion. Had she given up? But before they could process what was happening, Ashrenah attacked with her claws and teeth. She was Omega, yes, but she was still a wolf, and wolves were predators. She fought like something wild and untamed, like a creature that had never learned to fear death. She bit and clawed and kicked, fighting with a savagery that shocked the alphas. They were used to civilized combat, to rules and honor and controlled violence. This was something else. This was primal. One alpha went down with her teeth in his throat. Another fell screaming with her claws across his eyes. The remaining 3 backed away, suddenly uncertain. They were larger, stronger, better trained. But Ashrenah had something they did not have. She had nothing left to lose. She pressed her attack, driving them back toward the edge of the boulder. One of them swung wildly at her and she ducked under his strike, came up inside his guard and shoved him. He teetered on the edge for a moment, his eyes wide with shock, and then he fell. 2 left. They came at her together, trying to use their numbers. But on top of the boulder there was limited space, and they got in each other's way. Ashrenah danced between them, striking at joints and pressure points, using every dirty trick she had ever learned. This was not the elegant combat she had used against Thorax's sons. This was street fighting, desperate and ugly and effective. She caught one of them with a paw strike to the throat, and he went down gagging. The last alpha looked at her, looked at his fallen companions, and his courage broke. He turned and fled, scrambling down the boulder as fast as he could. Ashrenah stood alone on top of the boulder, swaying on her feet. Below her, the remaining alphas stared up in shock. She had defeated 7 of them on top of the boulder alone. Combined with her earlier victories, that was 10 alphas defeated. But there were still 7 more, and she had nothing left. Her vision was fading. Her legs would not hold her much longer. She was going to fall. And then from the edge of the crowd she heard it. A small voice, trembling but clear. "Get up! Please get up!" Ashrenah focused on the voice. It was coming from a small pup, one of the Omegas. The pup's eyes were filled with tears but also with hope. "Please," the pup whispered, "do not let them win." Other voices joined in, other Omegas finding their courage. "Get up! You can do this! Do not give up." For her entire life, Ashrenah had fought alone. She had trained alone, suffered alone, survived alone. But in that moment, she realized she was not alone anymore. She was fighting for all of them, for every wolf who had been beaten down and told they were nothing, for every Omega who had been forced to bow their head and accept their place. She picked up her sword. It felt like it weighed as much as a boulder, but she lifted it anyway, and she began to climb down. The remaining 7 alphas watched her descend. They could see how exhausted she was, could see the blood and the wounds and the way she struggled with each movement. They knew they could end this easily. But they were afraid. They had watched her do the impossible. They had seen her defeat 10 of their strongest warriors. They had seen her refuse to give up even when any sane wolf would have submitted. And they knew that if they attacked her now, she would find a way to take some of them down with her. None of them wanted to be the one she took down. Ashrenah reached the ground and faced them. "Well," she said, "who is next?" The 7 alphas looked at each other. Then, one by one, they lowered their swords. "I submit," one of them said quietly. "I submit," said another. "I submit. I submit. I submit. I submit. I submit." All 7 of them. They had submitted without Ashrenah even raising her sword. The pack erupted in chaos. Some wolves were cheering, overcome by the incredible spectacle they had witnessed. Others were howling in outrage, unable to accept what had just happened. The Omegas were crying and hugging each other, barely able to believe what they had seen. And Thorax, the great pack leader, stood on his rock with an expression of pure shock on his scarred face. For the first time in his 15 winters of leadership, he did not know what to do. Ashrenah stood in the center of the stone circle, barely conscious, her sword hanging from her paw by the thinnest thread of determination. She looked up at Thorax and spoke words that no Omega had ever spoken before. "I have defeated or received submission from 17 alphas," she said. "The trial of blades is complete. I claim the right of the victor." The right of the victor. It was an ancient law, one that predated even Thorax's rule. Any wolf who defeated every challenger in the trial of blades earned the right to be recognized as alpha, earned the right to lead hunts and make decisions and stand beside the pack leader as his equal. Thorax's eyes blazed with fury. "You are Omega," he roared. "No law can change that." "The law is the law," Ashrenah said. "You said so yourself. You are not above it." The pack had gone silent, watching this confrontation with held breath. Thorax descended from his rock and walked toward Ashrenah. He was massive compared to her, a giant of fur and muscle and scars. He could kill her with one strike. But he did not strike. He stood before her, studying her with those cold, yellow eyes, and finally he spoke. "You are right. The law is the law, and you have won the trial of blades through skill and determination and sheer stubborn will. I acknowledge your victory." The pack gasped. Even Ashrenah was shocked. She had expected Thorax to kill her, to twist the laws to suit his purpose. But he had acknowledged her victory. He had called her skill and determination. Coming from Thorax, that was the highest praise. "But," Thorax continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl, "a law older than the trial of blades says that any wolf can be challenged by another for their rank. I challenge you, Ashrenah, here and now, alpha against alpha. except you are barely standing. You can barely lift your sword. If we fight, I will kill you in seconds." He was right. Ashrenah was using every bit of strength she had left just to remain on her feet. If Thorax attacked now, she would die. But she met his eyes without fear. "Then kill me," she said. "But you will kill an alpha, not an omega, and every wolf in this pack will know what you are, a coward who could not defeat me fairly." Thorax's face went white with rage. For a moment, Ashrenah thought he would attack anyway, thought he would tear her throat out regardless of the consequences. But then he did something unexpected. He laughed. It was not a kind laugh, but it was genuine. "You have fire in you, Ashrenah, more fire than any wolf I have ever met. Very well, I will not fight you today. Rest, heal. And when you are recovered, when you are at full strength, then we will see who is the better warrior. Until that day, you are alpha of this pack. You have earned that much." He turned and walked away, his sons following behind him. The crowd parted before them like water, and Ashrenah, the omega who had defeated 17 alphas, finally let herself fall. The world went dark, and she knew nothing more. Ashrenah woke to pain. Every part of her body screamed in agony. Her muscles felt like they had been torn apart and badly stitched back together. Her bones ached. Even breathing hurt. But she was alive. She opened her eyes slowly, wincing at the light. She was in a den, but not the cold, miserable cave where the omegas usually slept. This was a real den, with soft moss on the floor and walls that blocked the wind. Someone had bandaged her wounds with herbs and leaves. Someone had left water and meat within reach. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through her ribs like lightning. She gasped and fell back, her vision swimming with black spots. "Easy," a voice said. "You are in no condition to move." Ashrenah turned her head carefully and saw an elderly wolf sitting at the entrance of the den. His fur was gray with age, and one of his eyes was clouded with blindness, but she recognized him. This was Morak, the pack's healer. He was a Beta, one of the middle wolves who served the pack with their skills rather than their strength. "How long?" Ashrenah asked. Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a croak. 3 days, Morak said. He moved closer, checking her bandages with practiced pause. "You should be dead, you know. I have treated many warriors in my time, but I have never seen anyone push themselves as far as you did. Your body simply shut down. If your will to live had been even slightly weaker, you would have died where you fell." 3 days, Ashrenah processed this information slowly. "Thorax," she asked. "Has kept his word," Morak said. "He announced that you are now Alpha. The pack is still in shock, but they are following his lead. The Omegas, though." He paused, his good eye gleaming with something that might have been pride. "The Omegas are calling you their champion. They are saying you are proof that the old ways can be challenged. Some of the younger ones are even talking about training to fight like you did." Ashrenah felt a mixture of emotions at that. Pride, yes, but also fear. She had broken the old ways, yes, but what would come next? What would happen to the pack's structure if every Omega decided they could be Alpha? "Here," Morak said, pushing a bowl of water toward her. "Drink. You need to rebuild your strength. Thorax has given you time to heal, but once you are recovered, he will challenge you. And make no mistake, Ashrenah, when that day comes, he will try to kill you." Ashrenah drank the water slowly, feeling it soothe her parched throat. "I know," she said. "I have always known." Over the next 7 days, Ashrenah slowly recovered. Morak tended to her wounds with skill and patience, applying healing herbs and making sure she ate enough to regain her strength. But even as her body healed, Ashrenah's mind was troubled. Wolves came to visit her. Some were curious, wanting to see the Omega who had become Alpha. Others were angry, believing she had violated the natural order. But most were simply uncertain, not sure what to think or how to treat her. The Omegas came too. They brought her gifts, small things they had scrounged or made. A bone carved into a charm, a bundle of soft moss for her bedding, flowers from the meadow. They were offerings of gratitude and hope. Ashrenah accepted them all, understanding what they meant. She was not just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for all of them. On the 8th day, Ashrenah was strong enough to leave the den. She walked through the pack's territory slowly, testing her recovered strength. The wounds had healed into scars, marks she would carry for the rest of her life. But she was alive, and she was alpha. She made her way to the hidden clearing where she had trained for 5 winters. The clearing looked the same as always, a small circle of grass surrounded by ancient pines. Her old practice sword, the branch she had found so long ago, was still propped against a tree where she had left it. Ashrenah picked it up, felt its familiar weight. She had come so far from the starving Omega pup who had first found this place. But in many ways, she was still that same pup, still fighting to survive, still trying to prove she was worth something. I remember when you first came here. Ashrenah spun around, her hand going to her side where a real sword now hung. She had been given proper weapons, proper armor, all the trappings of an alpha, but the voice that had spoken was not threatening. It was Fenrix, the youngest of Thorax's sons. He stepped into the clearing with his paws raised in a gesture of peace. "I mean no harm," he said. "I just wanted to talk." Ashrenah regarded him warily. Of all Thorax's sons, Fenrix had been the hardest to fight. He was smart, patient, and he had never shown the cruelty of his brothers. But he was still Thorax's son, still loyal to the old ways. "How did you find this place?" she asked. "I followed you," Fenrix admitted. 5 winters ago, when you were just a pup, I saw you sneaking away at night and I was curious. I watched you train, watched you practice with that branch. I saw everything." Ashrenah's blood ran cold. "And you never told anyone." Fenrix shook his head. "I did not know what to think. Part of me wanted to report you, to tell my father that an Omega was breaking the law, but another part of me was fascinated. I had never seen such determination, such single-minded focus. You trained every night, no matter the weather, no matter how exhausted you were. You never gave up, and I found myself wondering what would happen if you ever got the chance to prove yourself." "And now you know," Ashrenah said. "Yes," Fenrix agreed. "Now I know, Ashrenah, I need to tell you something. My father is planning something. He has been meeting with the alphas in secret, talking about what to do with you. Some of them want to accept the new order, but others—" He paused, his expression troubled. "Others want you dead. They want to challenge you before you are fully healed, want to kill you and restore the old ways." Ashrenah had expected this. She had known that breaking the old ways would come with a price. "And you?" she asked. "What do you want?" Fenrix was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I want the pack to be strong. I was raised to believe that strength comes from following the old ways, from keeping every wolf in their proper place. But I watched you defeat 17 alphas. I watched you refuse to give up even when any sane wolf would have submitted. And I realized something. True strength does not come from keeping others down. It comes from allowing everyone to rise as high as they can go." He met her eyes, and for the first time, Ashrenah saw something in them that she had never seen before. Respect. "You are going to change everything," Fenrix said. "The old ways are already crumbling. Omegas are starting to believe they can be more. Betas are questioning the alphas. Even some of the alphas are wondering if maybe the old ways were wrong. You have started a revolution, Ashrenah. The question is, can you finish it?" Ashrenah looked at the practice sword in her paw, then at the real sword at her side. She thought about the Omegas who were calling her their champion, about the pups who were watching and learning, about the chance to change everything. "I do not know if I can finish it," she said honestly. "But I have to try, for all the wolves who have suffered under the old ways, for all the Omegas who were told they were nothing. I have to try." Fenrix nodded slowly. "Then you should know that my father plans to challenge you at the next full moon. That is 7 days from now. He is training constantly, preparing to kill you. And when the fight comes, he will not hold back. He will use every bit of his skill and strength to end you." "Then I will need to train as well," Ashrenah said. "Will you help me?" Fenrix looked surprised. "You want my help, after I fought against you in the trial?" "You fought with honor," Ashrenah said. "And you are smart enough to see that the old ways are ending. If we are going to build something new, we need wolves like you. Wolves who can adapt, who can learn, who can help bridge the gap between what was and what will be." For a moment, Fenric said nothing. Then, slowly, he smiled. "My father will disown me for this," he said, "but yes, I will help you." And so, for the next 7 days, Ashrenah trained again. But this time, she was not alone. Fenrix trained with her, teaching her the techniques that only alphas were allowed to learn. He showed her advanced footwork, combination attacks, defensive stances that could weather any assault. He shared the secrets that had been passed down through generations of alpha warriors. Other wolves came to watch. At first, just a few curious onlookers. But as word spread that Fenrix was training the Omega who had become alpha, more and more wolves arrived. Some came to mock, but many came to learn. By the 5th day, there were 20 wolves in the clearing, all of them training together. Alphas and betas and even a few brave Omegas, all learning from each other, all preparing for the battle that would determine the pack's future. Carven and Dravor came too, eventually. They arrived on the 6th day, their faces hard with old anger. But they did not attack. They simply watched, their eyes following Ashrenah's movements as she sparred with their brother. "Why?" Carven finally asked. "Why did he betray us?" Ashrenah paused in her training and looked at Thorax's eldest son. "He did not betray you," she said. "He made a choice. He chose to see past the old laws and imagine something better. That is not betrayal. That is courage." Carven's face twisted with emotion. "You destroyed everything we were taught to believe in. You made fools of us in front of the entire pack, and now you expect us to just accept it." "No," Ashrenah said. "I expect you to make your own choice. You can cling to the old ways and watch as they crumble around you, or you can help build something new, something where strength is measured not by what you take from others, but by what you help them become." Carven stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away without another word. But Dravor stayed. He watched the training for a while longer, then quietly picked up a practice sword and joined in. On the eve of the full moon, Ashrenah stood alone in the clearing one last time. Tomorrow, she would face Thorax. Tomorrow, everything would be decided. She would either win and usher in a new era for the pack, or she would lose and everything she had fought for would die with her. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a starving pup to an Omega to an alpha. She thought about all the wolves who were counting on her, all the hope she carried on her shoulders. And she realized something. She was not afraid. She had been afraid her entire life. Afraid of hunger, afraid of beatings, afraid of dying in the shadows unmourned and unmissed. But she was not afraid anymore. She had proven herself. She had earned her place. And whatever happened tomorrow, she would face it with her head held high. "Ready," Fenrix's voice came from behind her. Ashrenah turned to see him standing at the edge of the clearing. He was not alone. Behind him stood Dravor, and behind him, a dozen other wolves. They had come to support her, to stand with her on the eve of the greatest battle of her life. "Yes," Ashrenah said, "I am ready." The full moon rose over the territory of Vormon, painting the great stone circle in silver light. The entire pack had gathered, hundreds of wolves standing in concentric rings around the central arena. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. This was more than just a challenge between two alphas. This was a battle for the very soul of the pack. Ashrenah stood on one side of the circle, her new sword strapped to her side. She had spent the day in meditation, clearing her mind and preparing her body. She was as ready as she would ever be. Thorax stood on the opposite side. The great pack leader looked even more massive in the moonlight, his scarred face set in an expression of cold determination. He wore no weapons yet, but Ashrenah knew he would be armed with the finest blade the pack possessed. He had ruled for 15 winters through strength and skill. He would not give up his power easily. The pack was divided. On one side stood the traditionalists, the alphas and older wolves who believed in the old ways. They wanted Thorax to win, wanted everything to go back to the way it was before an Omega had dared to challenge the natural order. On the other side stood the reformers, the Omegas and younger wolves who had seen what Ashrenah could do and believed in the possibility of change. They were fewer in number, but their eyes blazed with hope and defiance. And in the middle stood the uncertain ones, the wolves who did not know what to believe anymore. They had seen impossible things happen. They had watched their fundamental understanding of the world crack and shatter. They simply wanted to know what would come next. Morak, the elderly healer, walked to the center of the circle. As the oldest wolf in the pack, it was his duty to oversee the challenge and ensure the sacred laws were followed. He looked at both fighters with his one good eye, and when he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the gathering. By the ancient law of challenge, Morak said, any alpha may be contested for their rank by another alpha. Thorax, pack leader and alpha, has issued such a challenge to Ashrenah, newly recognized alpha. This fight will continue until one fighter submits, is unable to continue, or dies. There will be no interference from the pack. The victor will be acknowledged by all as the superior warrior. Do both fighters accept these terms? I accept, Thorax said, his voice like thunder. I accept, Ashrenah said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her belly. Morak nodded solemnly, then let the challenge begin. He stepped back, leaving the two fighters alone in the center of the circle. Thorax drew his sword, a magnificent weapon carved from ancient oak and reinforced with strips of hardened leather. It was a blade that had tasted the blood of countless enemies, that had defended the pack for 15 winters. Ashrenah drew her own sword. It was newer, simpler, but it had served her well in the trial of blades, and more importantly, she knew how to use it. Thorax did not charge immediately. He was too experienced, too cunning for that. He circled Ashrenah slowly, studying her stance, looking for weaknesses. She had been an Omega just days ago. Surely she would make mistakes that he could exploit. But Ashrenah had learned from Fenrix, had trained with some of the best warriors in the pack. She kept her guard tight, her movements economical. She did not give Thorax any openings. You have come far, Thorax said as he circled. Further than any Omega in the history of our pack. But this is where your story ends. I have killed wolves twice your size. I have survived battles that would have destroyed lesser warriors. What makes you think you can defeat me? Because I have something you do not have, Ashrenah replied. I have nothing to lose. You are fighting to keep your power, to maintain the old ways. I am fighting for my life, for my freedom, for every wolf who has ever been told they were nothing. Which of us do you think wants victory more? Thorax's eyes narrowed. Then, without warning, he attacked. His first strike was blindingly fast, a horizontal slash meant to cut Ashrenah in half. She blocked it, but the force of the blow nearly knocked the sword from her paws. Thorax was stronger than any opponent she had faced, stronger even than Carven. Each of his strikes carried the weight of 15 winters of experience and the raw power of the pack's greatest warrior. He pressed his attack, giving her no time to breathe, no chance to counter. Ashrenah was forced backward, her sword moving in a blur of defensive blocks. The crowd was silent, watching with held breath as the pack leader dominated the fight. But Ashrenah was learning. She was studying Thorax's rhythm, the pattern of his attacks. He favored his right side, always following up a high strike with a low one. His footwork was aggressive but predictable. He was used to overwhelming opponents with raw power, not adapting to skilled defenders. And so Ashrenah adapted. She stopped trying to match his strength and instead focused on deflection. Instead of blocking his strikes head-on, she angled her sword to redirect them, using Thorax's own momentum against him. It was a technique Fenrix had taught her, a way for smaller fighters to survive against larger opponents. Thorax noticed the change and adjusted. He began to feint, to set traps with false openings. But Ashrenah had fought too many battles in the past days to fall for simple tricks. She saw through his deceptions and punished them with quick counter-strikes that forced him to defend. The fight settled into a deadly rhythm. Thorax would attack, Ashrenah would defend and counter, and neither could gain a decisive advantage. Minutes passed, then a quarter hour, then longer. Both fighters were breathing hard now, sweat matting their fur despite the cool night air. You are good, Thorax admitted between strikes. Better than I expected, but you are still fighting my fight. You are reacting to me, defending against me. You cannot win by defending forever. He was right. Ashrenah knew it even as she blocked another crushing blow. Her arms were beginning to tire. Thorax was older, but he was also much larger, with reserves of strength that she could not match. If this continued, he would outlast her. She needed to change the nature of the fight. Ashrenah disengaged, leaping backward to create distance. Thorax followed, sensing weakness, but Ashrenah was not retreating in fear. She was creating the space she needed for what came next. She remembered the trial of blades, remembered how she had used the environment to her advantage. The great stone circle was not just flat ground. It was filled with boulders and uneven terrain, obstacles that a clever fighter could use. She led Thorax on a chase through the stones, ducking and weaving between the ancient boulders. Thorax was faster than she expected, keeping pace despite his size. But Ashrenah knew these stones intimately. She had explored them as a pup, had hidden among them when the alphas came looking for omegas to abuse. She led Thorax to a narrow gap between two boulders, a space just barely wide enough for her to fit through. She squeezed through and came out the other side, then spun to face her pursuer. Thorax tried to follow, but his massive shoulders caught on the stones. For just a moment, he was stuck, and in that moment, Ashrenah struck. Her sword lashed out, catching Thorax across the shoulder. It was not a deep wound, the angle was wrong for that, but it was first blood, and more importantly, it was proof that she could hurt him. Thorax roared in pain and fury. He wrenched himself free of the stones with raw strength, tearing fur and skin in the process. His eyes blazed with hatred as he faced Ashrenah. "Clever," he snarled, "but tricks will not save you." He attacked again, but this time there was something different in his movements. He was angry now, his strikes less controlled, more savage. Ashrenah had gotten under his skin, had made him bleed in front of the entire pack. His pride was wounded, and that made him dangerous but also vulnerable. Ashrenah pressed her advantage. She used the stones, used the terrain, used every trick and technique she had learned. She was faster than Thorax, more agile, and she made him pay for every step. Small cuts appeared on his legs, his sides, his face. None of them were serious, but they added up. The pack began to murmur. They were watching their invincible leader being carved apart by an omega. Some of the traditionalists looked sick. Some of the reformers were beginning to cheer. Thorax knew he was losing. Ashrenah could see it in his eyes, in the way his attacks became more desperate. He was the greatest warrior the pack had ever known, and he was being defeated by a starved pup he had allowed to live out of contempt. And then Thorax did something unexpected. He threw his sword away. The crowd gasped. Ashrenah froze, confused. Why would he disarm himself? "You want to know the truth?" Thorax said, his voice carrying across the silent circle. "I let you live. When you were born, the elders wanted to kill you. They said a pup-born omega with no parents was cursed, that you would bring bad luck to the pack. But I stopped them. I let you live. And now you use that life to destroy everything I have built." Ashrenah's mind reeled. Thorax had saved her life. The wolf who had made her existence miserable, who had beaten her down and starved her and treated her like trash, had also been the reason she was alive. "I let you live because I believed that even the weakest wolf deserved a chance to prove their worth," Thorax continued. "But I also believed that you would fail, that you would accept your place and live out your days as Omega. I never imagined you would become this." He gestured at her with his empty paws. "You are everything I trained my sons to be, strong, cunning, unbreakable, but you are also everything I feared. You are change. You are the end of the old ways, and I cannot allow that." Thorax shifted his stance, and Ashrenah suddenly understood. He had not given up. He had simply changed weapons. He was going to fight her claw to claw, fang to fang, the way wolves had fought before they learned to make swords. And in that kind of fight, size and strength mattered more than skill. Ashrenah hesitated. Should she keep her sword? It would give her an advantage, but it would also make her look like a coward, afraid to face Thorax on equal terms. She thought about the Omegas watching from the crowd. She thought about what this fight meant to them, and she made her choice. She threw her sword away. The crowd erupted in shock and awe. Thorax's eyes gleamed with savage approval. "So be it," he said. "Let us finish this the old way." They charged each other simultaneously, meeting in the center of the circle with a crash that echoed off the stones. They grappled, claws raking, fangs snapping. It was brutal and primal and nothing like the elegant sword fighting that had come before. Thorax was larger, stronger, more experienced in this kind of combat. He used his weight to bear Ashrenah to the ground, used his massive paws to pin her down. His fangs went for her throat. But Ashrenah twisted at the last second, and his fangs closed on her shoulder instead. Pain exploded through her body, but she did not scream. She could not afford to scream. Instead, she brought her back legs up and kicked with all her strength, catching Thorax in the belly. The blow knocked the wind from his lungs, and his grip loosened. Ashrenah wriggled free and rolled away, her shoulder bleeding heavily. Thorax recovered quickly and came at her again. They fought with savage desperation, neither giving ground, neither willing to submit. Blood stained the ground beneath them. The crowd had gone completely silent, too shocked by the violence to make a sound. And then Ashrenah saw her opening. Thorax lunged for her throat again, committing fully to the attack. But Ashrenah had learned from their earlier exchanges. She knew his patterns now. She dropped low under his attack, and her claws found the wound she had opened on his shoulder with her sword. She drove her claws in deep and raked downward with all her strength. Thorax screamed, a sound of pure agony. His leg buckled and he crashed to the ground. Ashrenah did not hesitate. She was on him instantly, her fangs at his throat, one paw pressing down on his wounded shoulder. "Submit," she said, her voice shaking with exhaustion and emotion. "Please, I do not want to kill you." Thorax lay still beneath her, his chest heaving. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly he spoke. "I submit." The words were barely a whisper, but in the silence of the circle, every wolf heard them. Thorax, the invincible pack leader, the greatest warrior in the history of Vormon, had submitted to an Omega. Ashrenah released him and stepped back, her legs shaking so badly she could barely stand. Thorax slowly climbed to his feet, favoring his wounded shoulder. He looked at her with eyes that held no hatred, only a strange mix of pain and pride. "You have won," Thorax said, his voice carrying to every corner of the circle. "Not through tricks or luck, but through skill and courage and unbreakable will. I acknowledge your victory. I acknowledge your right to lead, and I acknowledge that the old ways are ending." He turned to face the pack, his massive form somehow diminished. "Ashrenah is now the alpha of this pack. Any who wish to challenge that, challenge me first, and I will show you why I ruled for 15 winters." No one challenged. The traditionalists looked defeated. The reformers were crying with joy. And the uncertain ones simply stood in stunned silence, trying to process what they had witnessed. Morak stepped forward, his ancient face solemn. "By the law of challenge, Ashrenah has defeated Thorax. She is recognized as Alpha. Let all wolves acknowledge this truth." "We acknowledge," the pack said as one, their voices rising to the moonlit sky. Ashrenah stood in the center of the great stone circle, blood dripping from her wounds, exhaustion pulling at every fiber of her being. She had done it. She had won. She was Alpha. But as she looked at the faces of the pack, she realized that this was not an ending. It was a beginning. The weeks following Ashrenah's victory were chaotic. The pack was divided between those who accepted the new order and those who clung to the old ways. Fights broke out. Arguments echoed through the territory. Some of the most traditional alphas left the pack entirely, unable to accept an Omega as their leader. But Ashrenah worked tirelessly to bridge the divide. She met with every faction, listened to their concerns, and slowly, carefully began to implement changes. The Omega class was abolished. Every wolf in the pack was now judged by their actions and abilities, not by the circumstances of their birth. Those who had been Omegas were given the same opportunities as everyone else. They could train as warriors, learn as healers, or pursue whatever path called to them. Some of them failed. Being given opportunity did not mean everyone would succeed, but many of them thrived. Wolves who had spent their lives being told they were worthless discovered talents they never knew they had. Ashrenah also changed how alphas were chosen. The trial of blades became open to all wolves, not just those already recognized as alpha, and it became a test not just of fighting skill, but of wisdom, leadership, and compassion. A wolf who could only fight might become a warrior, but to be alpha to lead others required more. Thorax recovered from his wounds, and to everyone's surprise, became one of Ashrenah's strongest supporters. He trained the new generation of warriors, teaching them the skills he had spent a lifetime perfecting. And though he no longer led the pack, he commanded as much respect as ever. His sons each found their own paths. Carven eventually left the pack to seek his fortune in other territories. He could not accept the new ways, and Ashrenah did not force him to stay. Dravor became captain of the hunt, using his speed and skill to lead successful expeditions. And Fenrix became Ashrenah's closest advisor, helping her navigate the complex politics of pack leadership. The territory of Vormon prospered under Ashrenah's rule. Other packs heard stories of the Omega who had become alpha, and some sent delegations to see if the stories were true. A few of these packs began to implement similar reforms, abolishing their own Omega classes and judging wolves by their merits. But not all the changes were peaceful. There were packs who saw Ashrenah's reforms as weakness, as corruption of the proper order. They tested the borders of Vormon, looking for signs that the pack had become soft under its new leader. They learned otherwise. When a neighboring pack called the Iron Fangs launched a raid on Vormon's territory, Ashrenah personally led the defense. She had continued to train every day since becoming alpha, never allowing her skills to rust. The raiders expected to find a weak pack led by an inexperienced leader. Instead, they found a unified force that fought with discipline and courage. Ashrenah cut through the raiding party like a storm, her sword singing through the air. The survivors fled back to their territory with stories of the silver wolf whose blade was faster than thought. After that, the raids stopped. Vormon's reputation as a strong, well-led pack spread throughout the region. Wolves who had been cast out from other packs as Omegas began to journey to Vormon, seeking a place where they would be judged fairly. Ashrenah welcomed them all. The pack grew, not just in numbers but in diversity and strength. Wolves with different skills, different perspectives, different experiences came together and made Vormon greater than it had ever been. But Ashrenah never forgot where she had come from. She continued to visit the hidden clearing where she had trained as a pup. She kept her old practice sword, the simple branch that had been her only companion during those lonely nights. And she made sure that every pup in the pack, regardless of their birth or their parents' status, was taught that they could become anything they wanted to be. That their worth was not determined by what others said about them, but by what they chose to do with their lives. One evening, as the sun set over the territory of Vormon, Ashrenah stood at the edge of the great stone circle. The place where she had fought 17 alphas, the place where she had defeated Thorax, the place where everything had changed. Morak joined her, moving slowly with the weight of his years. The old healer looked out over the territory with his one good eye and smiled. "You have done well, Ashrenah," he said, "better than anyone could have imagined." "I had help," Ashrenah replied. "I could not have done any of this alone." "True," Morak agreed. "But you were the one who had the courage to begin. You were the one who stood in this circle and refused to accept the way things were. That took a special kind of strength." They stood in silence for a moment, watching as pups played in the distance. Some of those pups had been born Omega under the old ways. Now they ran and played alongside alpha pups, with no one treating them differently. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not fought?" Morak asked. "If you had simply accepted your place as Omega?" Ashrenah thought about it. She thought about the scared, starving pup she had been. She thought about the nights spent training in secret, the desperate hope that things could be different. She thought about standing in the arena, knowing she would probably die but fighting anyway. "I would have died," she said simply. "Maybe not right away, but something inside me would have died, and I would have spent the rest of my life as a hollow shell. Fighting was the only way I could truly live. Morak nodded. And now look at what your fight has created. A better pack. A better way. You have given hope to every wolf who thought they were nothing. Fenrix approached from behind them, his footsteps quiet on the stone. Am I interrupting? He asked. Not at all, Ashrenah said. What news? The scouts have returned from the eastern border, Fenrix reported. The Iron Fangs are requesting a meeting. They say they wish to discuss peace and possibly adopt some of our reforms. Ashrenah raised her eyebrows in surprise. The Iron Fangs were one of the most traditional packs in the region. If they were willing to consider change, it meant her ideas were spreading further than she had dared to hope. Arrange the meeting, she said, but be cautious, this could be a trap. Fenrix smiled. Always cautious, that is what makes you a good leader, I will see to it. He departed, leaving Ashrenah alone with Morak once more. The old healer looked at her with fondness. You know, he said, when you were born, I was the one who argued against killing you. Thorax gets credit for saving your life, but it was my counsel that convinced him. I saw something in your eyes even then. A fire that would not be extinguished. Ashrenah felt a lump in her throat. Thank you, she said, for believing in me when no one else did. I did not believe you would become Alpha, Morak admitted with a dry chuckle. That was beyond my imagination. I simply believed you deserved a chance to live, but you took that chance and turned it into something magnificent. He turned to go, then paused. The world is changing, Ashrenah, and you are the one changing it. But remember, change is never complete. There will always be those who resist, who long for the old ways. Your fight is not over. It will never be truly over. But that does not mean it is not worth fighting. Morak left, his words hanging in the air. Ashrenah stayed at the stone circle as darkness fell and stars began to appear in the sky. She thought about everything that had happened, everything that had changed. She thought about the Omekga pup who had practiced with a branch in secret. She thought about the wolf who had stood in the arena against impossible odds. She thought about the alpha she had become, the leader who was trying to build something better. And she realized that Morak was right. The fight was not over. It would never be over. There would always be injustice to combat, old prejudices to overcome, new challenges to face. But that was okay, because she was not fighting alone anymore. She had allies now. She had friends. She had a pack that believed in her vision. And most importantly, she had proven that change was possible, that the old ways could be challenged, that even the lowest could rise to the heights if given the chance. Ashrenah returned to her den as the moon rose over Vormon. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new decisions to make. But tonight, she could rest. She had earned that much. As she settled into her moss bed, she noticed something at the entrance of her den. A small bundle wrapped in leaves. She opened it carefully and found a carved bone charm, simple but beautiful. Attached to it was a message written in claw marks on bark. Thank you for showing us we could be more. There was no name, but Ashrenah knew it came from one of the former Omekgas. She held the charm carefully, feeling the weight of what it represented. She had not fought just for herself. She had fought for all of them, and they had not forgotten. The seasons turned. Winter came and went, followed by spring, summer, and fall. Ashrenah continued to lead Vormon with wisdom and strength. The pack thrived, growing larger and more diverse with each passing year. More packs adopted her reforms. The idea that wolves should be judged by their merit rather than their birth spread like wildfire through the territories. Some called it the new way. Others called it Ashrenah's law. But whatever they called it, it was changing the world. There were setbacks, of course. Some packs rejected the new ideas violently. Wars were fought. Wolves died. Change never came easily or without cost. But slowly, steadily, the world was becoming a better place. Years passed. Ashrenah grew older, and though she remained a skilled fighter, she began to train the next generation of leaders. She wanted to ensure that when her time came to step down, there would be wolves ready to continue the work she had started. One of her best students was a young wolf named Myra. Myra had been born to parents who would have been Omekas under the old system. But in the new Vormon, she had been given the same opportunities as everyone else. And she had seized those opportunities with both paws, becoming one of the finest warriors and wisest counselors in the pack. Ashrenah saw herself in Myra. The same fire, the same determination, the same refusal to accept limits. She knew that when her time came, Vormon would be in good hands. But that time was not yet. Ashrenah still had work to do, still had a voice in the councils of the packs, still had wisdom to share. She would continue as long as she was needed. One evening, many years after her victory in the stone circle, Ashrenah stood again at that sacred place. Thorax stood beside her. The great warrior was old now, his fur gray, his movements slow, but his spirit was undiminished. "Do you ever regret it?" Ashrenah asked him. "Letting me win, you could have killed me that night if you had truly wanted to." Thorax was silent for a long moment. Then he laughed, a sound like distant thunder. "You noticed that, did you? I wondered if you would." "You threw away your sword," Ashrenah said. "You gave up your greatest advantage. You created a fair fight when you could have simply overwhelmed me." "I am old, Ashrenah, but I am not blind," Thorax said. "I saw which way the wind was blowing. I saw that the pack needed change, even if I did not want to admit it. And I saw that you were the only one strong enough, brave enough, and stubborn enough to make that change happen." He looked at her with those yellow eyes, now faded with age but still sharp. "So yes, I let you win, but do not think that diminishes your victory. You earned it through every moment of training, through every impossible fight you won, through every time you refused to give up. I simply chose not to stand in the way of destiny." Ashrenah felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "No," Thorax replied. "Thank you for showing an old wolf that he was wrong, for proving that strength comes in many forms, for building something better than I ever could have imagined." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as the sun set over the territory they had both shaped in their own ways. The story of Ashrenah, the Omeka who became Alpha, spread far beyond the boundaries of Vormon. It became a legend told around fires, a tale passed down through generations. Young wolves across countless territories heard the story and were inspired to challenge their own limitations, to question the old ways, to believe that they could be more than what others said they were. And in the territory of Vormon, where it all began, the great stone circle stood as a monument to the day everything changed. The day an Omeka picked up a sword and refused to accept her place. The day the old ways began to crumble. The day a new world was born. Ashrenah lived a long life, longer than anyone expected. She saw the reforms she had started spread to every corner of the known world. She saw the Omeka class abolished in pack after pack. She saw wolves who would have been nothing under the old ways rise to become leaders, healers, warriors, and visionaries. When she finally passed, surrounded by friends and admirers, the entire territory of Vormon mourned. But they did not mourn for long, because Ashrenah had taught them that death was not an ending, but a transition. That what mattered was not how long you lived, but what you did with the time you had. Her legacy lived on in the laws she had helped create, in the wolves she had inspired, in the world she had changed. The great stone circle became a pilgrimage site, a place where wolves came to remember the Omeka who had refused to bow, who had fought against impossible odds, who had proven that anyone could be alpha if they had the courage to claim it. And on quiet nights, when the moon was full and the wind whispered through the ancient pines, some said you could still see her. A silver wolf standing in the stone circle, her sword raised high, her eyes blazing with unquenchable fire. A reminder that no matter how dark the night, no matter how impossible the odds, hope never dies. As long as there are wolves willing to fight for what is right, as long as there are hearts that refuse to accept injustice, as long as there are souls brave enough to challenge the old ways and build something new, the spirit of Ashrenah lives on. She was Omeka, she was Alpha, she was legend. And her story, the story of the lowest rising to the highest, the story of courage in the face of impossibility, the story of one wolf who changed the world, will be told for as long as wolves remember how to speak.